Well, hello. Glad you could join us. Sometimes I say good evening because this is titled Friday Night Bible Study. When we were doing it live, we were doing it on Friday evening at 6:30. We generally schedule this to be posted at 6 on Friday evening. We did have a little glitch last week. We recorded this and uploaded it, and it didn't have any audio. So we had to redo everything Saturday morning and and then post that instead of what we had recorded earlier on Friday.
Didn't we do it live?
Right. Yeah, we streamed it live on Saturday morning. And but this time, before I started today, I recorded a very short video and played it back to make sure that the audio that it's showing that I have actually was showing up on the video itself. So we should be in good shape now, and we should have audio on the video. Of course, some people they put on headphones and so they can hear it. They can monitor the audio that they're getting. If I were bringing in audio from remote sources instead of from the phone over there, then I would have to do that. But I'm not doing that. So my hands are healing. Last week I told you about the problems that I had there on my thumbs from having not done any work all winter, and all of a sudden having to do the shorten the weeds in where it was very hard to push the mower. Um, Also, I didn't know this last week when I may have known it by Saturday, but we didn't. I didn't mention it. I got into some of our poison ivy, not much, but just enough that even now my palms are a little itchy and sore. But that's mostly gone away by today. So then this week I went out. I planned ahead, put on rubber gloves with gardening gloves over the rubber gloves, and then something to cover my arms. And I went out and I pulled up all the poison ivy I could find in our yard. And I was trying to be careful to pull up roots and runners and so forth along with it. Um, Poison ivy is a very hardy plant. It's not something people want, so they don't protect it. So over the years and centuries of evolution, the plant has turned out to be very hardy, and it's very hard to get rid of it. I don't think it's quite as bad as what they call bindweed out west, but it's close. Bindweed, if you so much as drop a leaf on the ground, it might start growing there, and it's essentially to get rid of it. At least when I was out there, they didn't have an herbicide that could get rid of it. You essentially had to kill the field for a year or two to get rid of the bindweed, which has another name. It's called morning glory. It's a vine like the poison ivy, and then you could restore the field after that. So if you had any bindweed anywhere, people would be very insistent that you not let it touch their land. Um, so, but
We
that's
had some crazy behavior out of the cats.
huh?
We've had some crazy behavior out of our cats.
Yeah. One of them was in gastric distress earlier today, and there was something that I hadn't picked up that I should have, namely a dead water bug on the floor. And they come into the house and they die because we have pest protection. I didn't pick it up, and eventually the one cat decided to eat it. At least I think that's what happened because it's gone now, and I didn't pick it up. And apparently the poisons set her gastric system off, and she was coughing up mucus and foamy stuff, and was in distress for a while. But she seems to have settled down and found herself a place to sit down and kind of go back to sleep. The other cat had been hiding in the den, and Mommy got to missing her kitty, so I picked the cat up and brought her into Mommy. And how long she sit there? About a half hour or so.
She stayed here, but she whined and complained about it the whole time. And I actually, for a moment there, I was afraid she was going to attack me.
Yeah, and at some point she got down on the footstool. She actually lay down a bit on the footstool, but she kept right on talking about it while she was laying there, like, "Oh, I'll do this, but I don't like it." So,
We have a theory, and this is really kind of out there, but trying to figure out what these cats are up to. I came down with a staph infection, and our long-haired cat decided that she had to be with me every moment. She had to be on me. If she wasn't on me, she was either in the litter box or eating. Otherwise, she was on me. And cats, there are some cats that can sense when a person is going to die. And here I had a staph infection that does it sometimes kills a person if they don't get it taken care of. Well, I went to the doctor, and the other cat, the cat that likes me, now the long-haired cat doesn't like me, yet she wouldn't leave my side. And the other cat that liked me couldn't be with me because there's this Mia in the way.
yeah.
So she kind of like went off and stopped pouting, I thought.
Yeah, we're not sure what's going on with them, but
And then I went to the doctor and I got put on antibiotics, and I started feeling better, and Mia is no longer with me every moment of the day.
well, we did resort
That
to
hardly has anything to do with me at all once again.
we
But now my cat that's so attached to me still doesn't want to be near me.
we did resort to actually shutting the other cat out of the room where she couldn't get to you for a day or two, and after that, then she quit clinging so bad. But yeah, so
Yeah, we did do that. And it's been really strange with these cats. And both of them today crying for,
mm-hmm.
he brought my cat in here, and she just sat here and fussed and complained the whole time she was here. And then the other cat's in out in the hall in some kind of distress, and we love our cats.
Yeah,
They're our children.
but they are limited in intelligence, and I'm not sure that the one learned not to eat dead bugs up off the floor, even though terrible things happened to her when she did. So
It was
that's
so
like
funny. Last night I was talking to her, talking to Mia. I told her to go get me a Coke out of the refrigerator, and she just ignored me, kept on licking.
mm-hmm.
So I said to her, I think I'm just going to have to trade you off for a Goggy, because Goggy's got enough brains to understand a few simple commands. And she jerked her head up and gave me this weird look like, I can't believe you just said that to me. It was so funny the way she jerked up and looked at me like that. I needed a good laugh, and she gave me one. I'm pretty sure she didn't understand what I said, but still, her timing. Maybe she did understand.
Yeah. Well, anyway, a couple of programming notes. I see in my email that I do have a Bible question waiting for me to answer. I didn't take time to try and answer it before this session. Um, but we do have a sermon presentation that we plan to stream live tomorrow. It's been written and it's ready to go, so we can do that tomorrow. And I might go ahead, if I get the question done by then, and read it then before we do the actual sermon presentation. So that's what's coming up here. And that's what went on this last week in this house. And I think we are ready to get started. Are you? Somehow we got hung up on here. Let's see if I can call her back. She was saying something, and so she apparently heard me, but then I could only hear that there was talking going on in the other room. All right. My guess is this thing has disconnected from the Wi-Fi. Well, okay, it's there. Well, let's try that again. I wonder if her phone has gone dead on her. I'll be back real quickly. Let me go check with her. Has your phone died? I'm trying to call you, but it's not going through. Because I'm calling you. Call me, see what happens. I may need to restart my phone. Okay, hang up and try again. I finally hung up. It rang, but it didn't give me an opportunity to answer it. I mean, it vibrated. It didn't ring. I'll have the phone closed. Call me again, see if it brings up the right thing, or I can answer it. Hello? Okay, we apologize for the interruption there. Are you on the phone?
Yeah.
Okay. Um, phone problems, but we're hooked back up for now. Let's bow our heads and we can begin. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for your blessings and we thank you for the opportunity of studying your word and there finding the histories of people who have struggled with life and with you and in some cases have won. We would like to win with you, to have your spirit enter our lives and transform our characters so that we are restored to the condition in which you created us and eventually be restored not just by character but by body as well. Toward that end, we ask that the Holy Spirit will be present as we study the Word and as we discuss these things, that each person who participates in this might receive the blessing you intend for that person. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
mention what I learned last night?
Please do.
Well, I don't know if I remember it very well. I will try. Have you heard the term shame culture?
Well, I have now.
What I took from the lecture that I listened to is that shame culture is being brought up in or living in the atmosphere where you have to look good. You want to have, you want others to have a good opinion of you. The most important thing is that people think that you're a nice person, that you're important, that you're well-to-do, that you're a fine, upstanding citizen. And in order to gain that, all kinds of rules are put into place. You can't wear this, you can't wear that, you can't go here, you can't go there. You can't eat this, you can't do that. You can't be seen with this person. You can't do this activity. You can't go to school over there. There is another culture, and that is the guilt culture. Guilt, G-U-I-L-T. It's not the same thing as the shame culture. The guilt culture is what happens when you step outside the boundaries of how you were created, and you act in a way that is contrary to love. That sets off your conscience, and you feel guilty. This is natural. Shame is not natural because it's based on selfishness. The need for others to think you're good, so you're acting in ways contrary to what is good and healthy for you or others around you, because you're acting to manipulate, control, etc.
Yep.
How'd I do?
You did pretty well. Of course, I didn't hear it. I slept through it, but yeah.
Well, considering I only have a partially functioning brain now, I think I did pretty good.
Okay. Well, at any rate, we are ready for the short chapter of Genesis 33.
Oh, I forgot.
What'd you
There was a
forget?
little bit more to that.
What's that?
The person who was giving the lecture was talking about your family of origin.
Well, yeah.
But when I was hearing it, I was hearing
The church you were brought up in.
the church system that I was brought up in. There's no, we had so many rules that had to be followed. There's no way we could follow them. I even got in trouble once for taking my shoes off at school because the boys could see my feet.
Yeah.
I got in trouble because I used chapstick.
Yeah.
Now, another girl stole my bottle of perfume out of my desk. That was okay. But you mustn't wear chapstick.
That's too close to lipstick.
Yes.
Which is disallowed adornment.
Right.
Yeah.
You're a Jezebel if you use makeup.
Yeah.
Of course, I once looked up the meaning of the word Jezebel, and it came to something along the lines of filthy whore. Oh,
Yeah.
am I supposed to not say that word? I'm sorry.
Well, as I was saying, Genesis 33 is a short chapter, and that's unfortunate because it's about the only chapter where that we have left in the book where something more or less good happens. There'll be a few, but there are some chapters that tell some stories of some very negative, very destructive behaviors on the part of this dysfunctional family that we're reading about. And that's going to kind of dominate the landscape for quite a few chapters here. So 33 is unfortunately a short chapter that tells about something relatively good that happened in this narrative of this family. Now, we concluded last week at chapter 32. 32 ends with the story of Jacob wrestling with a being and finding out at the end of things that it was some representative of or God himself that he was dealing with. And his name is changed. And now morning has come, and it says, to begin chapter 33, then Jacob looked up and saw Esau coming with his 400 men. Well, he's still thinking in the mode that he has been, even though he's found out he wasn't wrestling with an emissary of his brother, but with an emissary of God. He's still in that fear mindset. And it says, so he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and his two servant wives, or the wives who were the servants of his main wives. He put the servant wives and their children at the front. Each one had 2 children. Leah and her children next. She had 6 sons. And Rachel and Joseph last. Well, we know that Rachel was the woman he really wanted. And we know from the story that we are about to read that he showed a lot of favor to her son, Joseph, that he didn't to his other sons, which led to all sorts of problems and caused him no end of misery as he progressed through the rest of his life. But because we know that, then we know he's acting out of fear because he puts what he considers to be least important out in front and what he considers to be most important in the back. And we also then get a sense of his preferences because the handmaids and their children are right at the front, and then Leah and her children, and finally Rachel and Joseph. There's the hierarchy of his regard for the women that bore him sons. Then Jacob went on ahead. Yeah, at least he went ahead of them. He shows that much good sense. As he approached his brother, he bowed to the ground 7 times before him. Then Esau ran to meet him and embraced him, threw his arms around his neck, and kissed him. And they both wept. Now, there's no indication that there was any conversation between the two yet when they meet and embrace. I mean, there's the body language of Jacob bowing to the ground before him and so forth. But Esau's immediate approach to this is to run up to meet him and embrace him. So there is very strong evidence that Esau wanted to do good things for his brother at this point and didn't bring his 400 men out to destroy his brother, which was what his brother feared. Then Esau looked at the women and children and asked, "Who are these people with you?" "These are the children God has graciously given to me, your servant," Jacob replied. Then the servant wives came forward with their children and bowed before him. Next, came Leah with her children, and they bowed before him. Finally, Joseph and Rachel came forward and bowed before him.
And when those children were old enough to figure out that Dad had been afraid and put them out there first, there was a lot of damage done to them.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. "And what were all the flocks and herds I met as I came?" Esau asked. Remember last week as we read through that, he'd sent a whole host of animals ahead with herdsmen to tell Esau that they were a gift from his brother, trying to placate his brother, which he didn't really need to do, but that's what he was doing. Jacob replied, "They are a gift, my lord, to ensure your friendship." "My brother, I have plenty," Esau answered. "Keep what you have for yourself." Now, this may indicate a bit of a change in Esau himself. I mean, there is a change in his attitude toward his brother, because before his brother went to Padan Aram, he was thinking, when my dad dies, I'm going to kill him. Well, he's not acting like that now. But the other change seems to be, as a younger man, he was an outdoorsman. He would go out and hunt game. He was a hunter. He wasn't real keen on domestic life and the domestic animals and all of that. That's what his brother did. Stayed there in the camp with his mother and raised the animals, became good at raising animals, which was revealed then in his dealings with his uncle, where he had the skills to help his uncle's herds grow and for his uncle and himself to prosper in keeping these animals. However, now Jacob is sending all these animals, and Esau says, "My brother, I have plenty." Isaac is not yet dead, but apparently Rebekah is. So the household of Isaac has been under the day-to-day direction of Esau himself. And he seems to have come to terms with that different lifestyle. "I have plenty. I've got lots of flocks and herds of my own now. Keep what you have for yourself." But Jacob insisted, "No, if I have found favor with you, please accept this gift from me. And what a relief to see your friendly smile." Well, if you thought you were about to die and turns out your brother's being friendly, yeah, that's a big relief. That's a load off in spades. It is like seeing the face of God. "Please take this gift I have brought you, for God has been very gracious to me. I have more than enough." And because Jacob insisted, Esau finally accepted the gift. "Well," Esau said, "let's be going. I will lead the way." But Jacob replied, "You can see, my lord, that some of the children are very young, and the flocks and herds have their young too. If they are driven too hard, even for one day, all the animals could die. Please, my lord, go ahead of your servant. We will follow slowly at a pace that is comfortable for the livestock and the children. I will meet you at Seir." Seir is the place that Esau moved to and where he set up, and it became the primary, well, not necessarily primary, but one of the territories of the country of Esau, or Edom as it became known, was Seir. And as we read later in the Old Testament prophets speaking about Edom, they will speak of Seir. So Jacob says, I know where you live, I'll meet you there, but we're going to have to go a bit slower because of all the young and the flocks and the children and so forth. All right, Esau said, but at least let me assign some of my men to guide and protect you. Now, what was it you were saying about why Esau had these 400 men?
They could have been living in an area that was violent, and he was in charge of his household, so he had trained men to act as scouts to look out for his people. Where if he saw a caravan coming or raiders coming, they would be ready to act. And it could be that they saw this caravan out there and somebody recognized who it was, sent word to Esau, and Esau went running out there realizing that they were unprotected, went running out there to offer protection to his brother.
And doesn't verse 15 here support that interpretation when Esau says, at least let me assign some of my men to guide and protect you?
Yeah, it does.
Jacob responded,
Which is not the act of somebody that wants to kill him.
No, that I think that's clear. Esau has changed to some extent. He's given up his resentment over his brother's deception, and perhaps he's even a little bit lonely now that his mother is gone, and so he's willing to accept his brother back into the homeland, and maybe his brother will take on some of the tasks that he found a little less than desirable. So wouldn't do any good to kill him, because then Esau would have to do all that. I don't know. That's just some speculation about what might have been going through Esau's mind. But
his action when he met his brother returning was the action of somebody who had missed his brother and was happy to see him.
Absolutely, yes.
Not somebody who was angry that he had returned.
Anyway, we've kind of stopped there in the middle of verse 15. It goes on. Jacob responded, that's not necessary. It's enough that you've received me warmly, my Lord. And Jacob is I'm not sure. I think there's a term for it, being excessively submissive, probably because he's kind of in that mode that he still has to placate his brother, even though now he knows his brother isn't out to get him. He's still playing this submissive thing, calling him my Lord and calling himself your servant and so forth. So Esau turned around and started back to Seir that same
There
day.
is a term for it, but it's not a nice term.
What?
Kissing someone's behind.
Well, yeah, but that's not the term I had in mind.
It's not nice. And you had to ask what?
Yeah, well, I had a more sophisticated term in mind, but it's not coming to mind right now. I think maybe obsequious, but I'm not sure what the meaning of that word is, so I'm not sure if that's what I wanted to use or not. But just excessively submissive is the idea that I was trying to communicate there. So Esau turned around and started back to Seir that same day. Jacob, on the other hand, traveled on to Succoth. There he built himself a house and made shelters for his livestock. That is why the place was named Succoth, which means shelters. So I think verse 17 there is very clear evidence that Genesis tends to use names for places in the narrative, at times in the narrative before when the place had that name, because it says Jacob traveled to Succoth. Well, then we find out that it was named Succoth because the word means shelters, and Jacob built shelters there. So it wouldn't have had that name until after Jacob built the shelters there, and yet it's using it. So it's kind of pre-using the name because the people who would read the book would know where Succoth was. So it uses that term to say where he went, rather than using the term that might have been appropriate for it at that time, if there even was one. Later, having traveled all the way from Padan Aram, Jacob arrived safely at the town of Shechem in the land of Canaan. There he set up camp outside the town. Jacob bought the plot of land where he camped from the family of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 pieces of silver. And there he built an altar and named it El Elohe Israel. Now there's the only 2 footnotes in the chapter, right there in the last 2 verses. The 100 pieces of silver, the Hebrew says 100 kasitas, and then this says the value or weight of the kasita is no longer known. So it's hard to place a value, a modern value, on what he paid for the land. But he paid for it. And Hamor accepted the payment and gave Jacob a plot of land for himself and for his animals. Then the other footnote is for the El Elohe Israel, which means God, the God of Israel. And El Elohe Israel can mean God, the God of Israel, or mighty is the God of Israel. I was reading that in the footnote on a different version for verse 20 there. So, as I said, a short chapter. We find out that Esau wasn't bent on destruction when he came to meet his brother, but he just wanted to meet his brother and be reunited, and they were. Now the real craziness begins. Remember that Jacob has moved to a place near the city of Shechem. And again, this is probably pre-naming the place because Shechem is the name of Hamor's son, and it probably didn't get the name Shechem until later when Israel took over the land. They gave it the name Shechem because of the name of Hamor's son. So it probably wasn't yet called Shechem. At any rate, he's living there near Hamor, the father of Shechem, and obviously then near Shechem himself. And the narrative now tells us one day Dinah, the daughter of Jacob and Leah, remember she was mentioned earlier, and she's the only daughter mentioned, although we rather doubt that she was the only daughter he had. She's the only one mentioned because of this story. We have to know who she is when we get to this story. She is a daughter of Leah. One day Dinah, the daughter of Jacob and Leah, went to visit some of the young women who lived in the area. Time to get together with some other young ladies about her age and have a little girl talk, I guess. But when the local prince, Shechem, son of Hamor the Hivite, saw Dinah, he seized her and raped her. But then he fell in love with her, and he tried to win her affection with tender words. He said to his father Hamor, "Get me this young girl. I want to marry her." Um, that's rather unusual because usually when a man takes a woman by force, when he's done, he despises her. We'll see that in the story of Amnon and Tamar, and we'll see that in other cases. When a man has illegitimate sex with a woman, his morality genes kick in, and he begins to think, well, if she was that easy, she must not be a very moral woman. She's not the woman for me. Even though
Maybe there weren't any other Adventists watching him, so it's okay for him to love her.
I don't know. But it says he forced her, but then it goes on and says that he decided he liked her and he wanted to keep her. Or, he wants to do the right thing by her or whatever. Soon Jacob heard that Shechem had defiled his daughter Dinah. But since his sons were out in the fields herding his livestock, he said nothing until they returned. Hamor, Shechem's father, came to discuss the matter with Jacob. "My son wants to marry your daughter. Can we arrange something?" Meanwhile, Jacob's sons had come in from the field as soon as they heard what had happened. They were shocked and furious that their sister had been raped. Shechem had done a disgraceful thing against Jacob's family. I think that footnote A is going to tell us that, done a disgraceful thing in Israel. That's exactly what I thought the literal wording of that would be. Something that should never be done. Hamor tried to speak with Jacob and his sons. "My son Shechem is truly in love with your daughter." Maybe, maybe not, but that's the story that they're going to tell. He said.
Now I have a question for you.
All right.
Was it really rape, or was Dinah trying to protect herself?
Was she saying it that way because she got with this guy and liked it, but then she thought, "Oh my goodness, what's my family going to say? Well, I'll tell them he raped me." I don't know.
Throw him under the bus in order to protect yourself.
Yeah. And the fact that he didn't end up hating her suggests that it wasn't rape, because usually in rape, the man ends up hating the woman. Usually. So, it's not proof, it's just evidence. "My son Shechem is truly in love with your daughter," he said. "Please let him marry her. In fact, let's arrange other marriages too. You give us your daughters for our sons, and we will give you our daughters for your sons." It seems unlikely, given his mother's prejudice against Canaanites, that Jacob would agree to such an arrangement. And given the trouble that Isaac and Rebekah seem to have had with Esau's Canaanite wives. Now let's read on here, because he had more to say. "And you may live among us. The land is open to you. Settle here and trade with us, and feel free to buy property in the area." Of course, he'd already bought some, but okay, maybe more. Then Shechem himself spoke to Dinah's father and brothers. "Please be kind to me and let me marry her," he begged. "I will give you whatever you ask. No matter what dowry or gift you demand, I will gladly pay it. Just give me the girl as my wife." But since Shechem had defiled their sister Dinah, Jacob's sons responded deceitfully to Shechem and his father Hamor. Why would Jacob's sons think of being deceitful? Where would they have picked up that approach to life?
From their parents.
Absolutely.
My sister. I mean, not sisters. Yeah, she is my sister.
Uh-huh. Well, yeah, from the grandparents and so forth. Yeah, it's the faulty coping mechanism that seems to have been part of this family is if you get into trouble, lie your way out of it. So now they're being intentionally deceitful. And how deceitful you either already know or you're about to see.
Swap the bride and don't bother to tell the groom until like to do anything about it.
Yeah. They said to them, "We couldn't possibly allow this because you're not circumcised. It would be a disgrace for our sister to marry a man like you. But here is a solution. If every man among you will be circumcised like we are, then we will give you our daughters and we'll take your daughters for ourselves. We will live among you and become one people. But if you don't agree to be circumcised, we will take her and be on our way." Now, they said it this way in order to deceive Hamor and Shechem, but they were probably also saying this because they were also deceiving their father. They probably knew that what they had in mind is not something their father would approve.
Question for you.
What?
Shame culture or guilt culture?
On whose part?
Dina's brothers.
Oh, well, I think it's very much a case that they wanted to look good. But
Yeah. Now, what
that,
about
that
Shechem?
they are acting here out of anger and they are being crafty and deceitful in order to get the most violent revenge that they want. And the response that they want is going to be exceptionally disproportionate. Reading on, Hamor and his son Shechem agreed to their proposal. Shechem wasted no time in acting on this request, for he wanted Jacob's daughter desperately. Shechem was a highly...
Right buyer.
Huh?
He wanted to make things right.
Well, yeah. Shechem was a highly respected member of his family, and he went with his father Hamor to present this proposal to the leaders at the town gate. Now, I don't know if Hamor was the leader of this city. He lived there. He was not. It doesn't really say. Just we know he lived there. He tells us that because he's about to be a big part of the story. We would think so if the place gets called Shechem, but we're going to see that that wasn't necessary. That in fact the Shechem name came from something else. At any rate, they're acting deceptively, and they're calling on them to be circumcised, which is a very painful thing for an adult male. So they go to the leaders at the town gate. Now, Hamor may have been one of them, but it doesn't sound like he was anything like a dictator. This was something they had to put through to the real powers in the city. These men are our friends, they said. Let's invite them to live here among us and trade freely. In other words, commerce is a motive here. Look, the land is large enough to hold them. We can take their daughters as wives and let them marry ours. But they will consider staying here and becoming one people with us only if all our men are circumcised just as they are. But if we do this, all their livestock and possessions will eventually be ours. Well, whether that's really Hamor and Shechem's intent, that's how they're selling it to the city elders. Come, let's agree to their terms and let them settle here among us. So all the men in the town council agreed with Hamor and Shechem, and every male in the town was circumcised. But 3 days later, when their wounds were still sore, two of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, who were Dinah's full brothers, took their swords and entered the town without opposition. Then they slaughtered every male there, including Hamor and his son Shechem. They killed them with their swords, then took Dinah from Shechem's house and returned to their camp. Talk about disproportionate revenge here. One man takes advantage of their daughter, and maybe it was rape, maybe it wasn't, but in their mind, that's how they're going to portray it. And so they go in and kill every male in the city.
Oh, that lecture last night.
Yeah.
He was talking about honor killings. I
Right.
forgot all about that, how honor killings work into the shame-based culture.
Well, yeah, because if you act outside the rules and the limits, you bring shame on the family. So then the family has to redeem itself by killing you in order to maintain its image in the community.
Even if you're an innocent victim and it brings shame upon the family, they still have to kill you.
Yeah.
Or think they do.
Yeah. So, as I'm saying, this was an exceptionally disproportionate act of revenge. And Simeon and Levi are the ones who apparently led out in it, and maybe they were the only ones who were involved in what they did. 2 men against an entire city, but that is exactly why they demanded the circumcision, so that the men would be weakened, and the 2 of them could then engage in this act of disproportionate revenge without losing their own lives. Meanwhile, the rest of Jacob's sons arrived. Finding the men slaughtered, they plundered the town because their sister had been defiled there. They seized all the flocks and herds and donkeys, everything they could lay their hands on, both inside the town and outside in the fields. They looted all their wealth and plundered their houses. They also took all their little children and wives and led them away as captives. So now the women and children of the city are going to end up essentially slaves because of this disproportionate revenge. And what did the women and children have to do with Shechem's actions toward Dinah? Well, exactly nothing. We use the term innocent here guardedly because while they were humans and probably weren't totally innocent, yet when it comes to the reason for Simeon and Levi's revenge, these women and children were innocent of the offense that stoked these brothers' ire. Afterward, Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You have ruined me. You've made me stink among all the people of this land, among all the Canaanites and Perizzites. We are so few that they will join forces and crush us. I will be ruined and my entire household will be wiped out. That's what the rashness of youth will do. Act on the passions of the moment without regard for the long-term effects. You go into a land and you wipe out all the men of a city, take all the women and children as captives. How is the rest of the land going to feel about you? How are they likely to treat you? They hadn't thought of that, most likely. They were young and rash, and they just went out and did what their vile minds came up with to do. And how do they answer their father? But why should we let him treat our sister like a prostitute? They retorted angrily. I want to read that from a paraphrase that I'm familiar with, and I do have it here. Now, back in the 60s, there was a popular paraphrase that came out called the Living Bible, done by a man named Ken Taylor. Since then, there's been another paraphrase that's been pretty popular, The Message. This one was done by a religion professor, and this particular edition, I've got two of them, is called The Clear Word. The previous edition was titled The Clear Word Bible, but a number of people raised objection to that because it's a paraphrase, so they didn't think that the term Bible should be used in the title. So that term was removed in subsequent editions of the book. But I want to read this because I recall the way he rendered this close to chapter 34. Do you remember that?
I'm familiar with the book because that second book is mine.
Is
you
it?
said you have two. One of them's mine.
Okay. Well, I think I have one of the initial ones.
Yours is the one that's autographed.
Yeah, mine is autographed by the man who did the paraphrase. Yours has a signature on the inside the front cover that says, "To Mother, Merry Christmas, Ethan."
Yeah.
Okay. So, Genesis...
I would not be using that book at all.
Huh?
I would not be using that book at all because he uses outside influences.
Well, yeah.
Adds things to the stories.
Okay. Here's how he renders verse 31. They answered, "You mean to tell us that we should have let our sister be used as a prostitute and just sit here and do nothing?" So they felt justified in what they had done. Now, that last sentence there in the verse, in this version, is entirely supplied by the paraphraser and is not in the original Hebrew. But yeah, I remember reading that before, and I thought that might be interesting to include.
Well, I thought I read somewhere that Jacob retorted she was to be treated like a princess.
I don't know. I've ever read that. Shechem is called a prince. So if she married him, she would have been a princess. She would have been, he was well respected in his family, so she would have been well respected as his wife. as much as a woman would in those days. But the brothers, possibly sharing their grandmother's um, what's the term I want? Prejudice against Canaanites, uh, certainly made this a big deal. Moving on now to chapter 35. Then God said to Jacob, "Get ready and move to Bethel and settle there. Build an altar there to the God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau." This narrative here says God told Jacob to do this, which reminds me of something I want to get to in a moment that we should have talked about last week or even the week before. I have heard an interpretation in which Jacob's travel to Bethel was necessitated by Simeon and Levi's actions dealing with the men of the city that they had moved in next to. Now he wasn't safe there, so he had to flee, and that fleeing here cost him very dearly. The narrative here, whoever penned this story or passed it down, holds that God told Jacob to go there and to do these things. So, Jacob.
But if God did that, that's not a case of God sitting back but letting you reap the results of your behavior.
Yeah. So, Jacob told everyone in his household, "Get rid of all your pagan idols, purify yourselves, and put on clean clothing. We are now going to Bethel, where I will build an altar to the God who answered my prayers when I was in distress."
Now, notice, he said, put away your idols. He did not say, remove your jewelry.
Yeah. Well, I was wanting to read that because I know that's been said about that passage.
That's one of the passages that's used.
I know. And I'm wanting to look that up here in the New American Standard Bible because I want to see, it'll probably render it in the way that we have gotten that interpretation, so I wanted to see what it was. So Jacob said to his household and to all who were with him, "Put away the foreign gods which are among you, and purify yourselves, and change your garments. And let us arise and go up to Bethel, and I will make an altar there to God, who answered me in the day of my distress, and has been with me wherever I have gone." So they gave to Jacob all the foreign gods which they had, and the rings which were in their ears, and Jacob hid them under the oak which was near Shechem. So that's where the jewelry thing comes from verse 4 there. And in this version it says, "So they gave Jacob all their pagan idols and earrings, and he buried them under the great tree near Shechem." But that doesn't say all their jewelry, just their pagan earrings.
Yeah, are pagan earrings idols?
Could be. What almost certainly happens at this point is that Jacob divests his household of the idols that Rachel had stolen. Leading us to believe, and it's not part of the narrative, but at some point he found out what his wife had done. And who knows? I mean, Rachel was the woman he loved. He would have found it hard to be harsh with her over it, but at the same time,
The death decree for whoever it was that took them.
yeah, but he probably was pretty upset to find out what she had done. And we can only guess how he dealt with it because the narrative doesn't tell us. As they set out, a terror from God spread over the family, over the people in all the towns of that area, so no one attacked Jacob's family. Well, that's probably the author's interpretation of things.
You've got a man with enough sons that have shown themselves to be capable of wiping out an entire city.
Yeah.
Is it God that's putting the fear in these people, or is it the actions of those boys?
Well, yeah.
And God is being given the blame.
Well, here's if God was involved, and I think he may have been, let's stop and think about it. If you terrorize somebody, is that going to cause inaction, or is that likely to invoke the fight, flight, freeze response so that some people would, because they have been terrorized, respond by fighting? And what this is specifically telling us here is that they did not go out and attack Jacob's family, so nobody was triggered to fight. And certainly some of these people would have had fight as their response to terror. Fight, flight, freeze. Some fight, some flee, and some just freeze. So we don't think God terrorized them because that wouldn't necessarily have been helpful. It is possible that God's Holy Spirit exerted a restraining influence that led to nobody attacking Jacob's family. Also, this is the thing that I mentioned a little bit earlier, I wanted to go ahead and address. At the end of verse 3, Jacob tells his family, "He, that is God, has been with me wherever I have gone." Now, we have hinted at it, but we haven't really addressed it. Was it really God blessing Jacob that led to his great wealth when he left Padan Aram? Well, we would have problems with that because of the prosperity gospel interpretation that often gets given to it if we say that. If you follow God, God will give you all these wonderful things. Well, God likes to give people wonderful things. That's part of his character of love.
But wealth is not generally a wonderful thing.
No, it can be problematic. The point is, I think we can accept that God blessed Jacob and that God's intervention helped Jacob get all these flocks and herds and servants and so forth while he was in Padan Aram without buying into the prosperity gospel.
I would say that having all those flocks was a curse.
Well, it could be. The thing I want to point out is that God's blessing to these people is unconditional. He chose Abraham. He chose Isaac. Because of what happened with Isaac, he chose Jacob. And because he chose them, he blesses them regardless of any merit on their part. the prosperity gospel suggests a commerce-like transactional relationship with God. And we have in the past talked about how our relationship with God should be relational, not transactional. In a relational approach to the interface between God and man, God can unconditionally say, I've chosen you, so I'm going to do good things for you. That has nothing to do with whether or not you're good or you do something of benefit to God. It's not a commerce type relationship. It's not a transaction. It's a
The blessing
relationship.
of God is not financially gainful. The blessing from tithe is that you're learning to give, and by giving, you're learning to love.
Mm-hmm. Well, at any rate, that I wanted to address this idea that yes, God blesses, but it's not what the prosperity gospel suggests is going on with God's blessing. It's not transactional, it's relational. God chose them, so he unconditionally blesses them.
The love of money
Is the root of all evil, yeah. Reading on then, verse 6. Eventually, Jacob and his household arrived at Luz, also called Bethel, in Canaan. Jacob built an altar there and named the place El Bethel, which means God of Bethel, because God had appeared to him there when he was fleeing from his brother Esau. Soon after this, Rebekah's old nurse, Deborah, died. So there's evidence that Jacob did, in fact, take part of the household assets of Isaac and move them in with him, because now his mother's old nurse was living with him, died there, and was buried beneath the oak tree in the valley below Bethel. Ever since, the tree has been called Alon Bakuth, which means oak of weeping. Now that Jacob had returned from Padan Aram, God appeared to him again at Bethel. God blessed him, saying, Your name is Jacob, but you will not be called Jacob any longer. From now on, your name will be Israel. And so God renamed him Israel. And the footnote there tells us that Jacob sounds like the Hebrew words for heel and deceiver. Israel means God fights, or more contends with God. Depends on who's interpreting and translating. Then God said, I am El Shaddai, God Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. You will become a great nation, even many nations. Kings will be among your descendants. And I will give you the land I once gave to Abraham and Isaac. Yes, I will give it to you and your descendants after you. Then God went up from the place where he had spoken to Jacob. So again, we see the renewal of the dual covenant, the covenant to make him a great nation, and the covenant to give him the land where he is currently living. Jacob set up a stone pillar to mark the place where God had spoken to him. Then he poured wine over it as an offering to God and anointed the pillar with olive oil. He'd done that with a stone that he'd slept on more than 20 years earlier when he fled to Padan Aram. And Jacob named the place Bethel, which means house of God, because God had spoken to him there. Now, when we read the story of Jacob spending the night there, it says there that he called it Bethel, but now it says he called it Bethel this time. And maybe he did it both times. That's possible. At any rate, we're again establishing why the place is no longer called Luz, but Bethel. Leaving Bethel, Jacob and his clan moved on to Ephrath. Now, Ephrath would have been close to where Bethlehem was. Bethlehem, Ephrathah. But Rachel went into labor while they were still some distance away. Her labor pains were intense. After a very hard delivery, the midwife finally exclaimed, "Don't be afraid, you have another son." Rachel was about to die, but with her last breath, she named the baby Ben-Oni, which means son of my sorrow. The baby's father, however, called him Benjamin, which means son of my right hand. So Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is, Bethlehem. Jacob set up a stone monument over Rachel's grave, and it can be seen there to this day. Well, whether it could be seen in our day, who knows? But at the time that this was committed to writing, the writers felt it was appropriate to say that it could be seen there even today. And again, the one suggestion that I have heard, not sure that I can place a lot of credit with it, but that Rachel's death was partly because the family was moving at the time she went into labor, and that Simeon and Levi's action then had some hand in causing their father's wife's death. She wouldn't be called a stepmother, would she? You there? She may have
Yeah.
been. Okay. What would she be called to Simeon and Levi? She's not their mother. Would she be called a stepmother? Or since they were both wives at the same time, would there be another term for it?
A relative's relative.
Okay. The point is, by this interpretation, they had a hand in her death. Well, could be, yeah. Then Jacob traveled on and camped beyond Migdal Eder. While he was living there, Reuben had intercourse with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Jacob soon heard about it. Now, verse 22 is quite short, and it tells us what could easily be a very long story.
Now, wait a minute. Didn't they just kill an entire city for one man having sex with somebody he shouldn't have?
With their sister, yeah.
Well, what about having sex with your mother? Or your brother's mother?
Well, having
Well,
sex...
that's not supposed to happen. That's your dad's wife.
Having sex with your dad's wife, that's probably the big deal. And in fact, we're going to run across a mention of that in our sermon presentation tomorrow. Father and son having the same girl.
Why didn't I want that Jacob's brothers or sons?
Well,
Jacob wrote encampment because of the actions of that one person.
and yeah, and Jacob here is not going to take kindly to what happened. And we'll talk about it as we go on. Yeah, and the footnote B there, when it said Jacob, then it put a footnote B. Hebrews says Israel, also in 35:22a. The names Jacob and Israel are often interchanged throughout the Old Testament, referring sometimes to the individual patriarch and sometimes to the nation. And we'll see that in tomorrow's sermon presentation, where Jacob gets used to refer to the entire nation. And more
And on his deathbed, when he was blessing his sons, their behavior was brought up, including the act of having sex with his wife,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
his dad's wife.
Well, we're not going to sit here and say Reuben did a good thing here. Not at all. But we might discuss what's going on here. For example, what part did Bela play in it?
Yeah.
There's no suggestion that Reuben forced her. He just went in and got it on with her. And I'm going to suggest that this is an indication of a character, of Reuben's character, and an aspect of his character that we're going to see come out a little bit differently later in this family story. That the two tend to go together.
Also, remember, he may not have recognized that this is wrong because he came from an incestuous family.
Well, try and look at it from Bela's standpoint. How often does she get to have sex with Jacob?
Probably not very often.
Yeah. She had the two sons. That's all it was. Jacob has other wives. He doesn't really need her. Yeah. So her motive may have been, here's a hot young man who's all ready to go. I could have fun with him. Haven't had it in a while. I'll have it with him. Not saying that's right, just saying that may have been her approach to the situation.
Sounds very human.
Yeah. And Reuben has, well, again, this may be an indication of the rashness of youth. He was young. He was, the hormones were stirring. He was desirous of having sex. Here was a woman that would be available to him. She was a servant in that culture. She was a servant. She didn't really count as a wife. She was just a concubine. Why shouldn't he? Jacob didn't see it in that light. And Reuben could probably, if he had stopped to think about it, have recognized that his dad was not going to take kindly to it. But he was probably thinking below the belt instead of with his brain.
She was his dad's property.
Yeah, and that may help explain Dad's wrath about the situation. Not so much that you had sex with my woman, but rather this is my property
my
and
property.
You violated it.
Yeah.
In which case, the response of Simeon and Levi to what happened to their sister, it can be seen as coming from a character very similar to that of Jacob himself, who now has this kind of response when his concubine is taken by his son.
And then there's Judah.
Yeah, we'll get to Judah. That story's coming up soon. Where'd my cursor go so I can scroll that? Right. By the way, Bela, if I'm correct, was not the handmaid of his mother. She was the handmaid of Rachel. Is that right?
I don't know.
Well, let me go and look, because it will say when Laban also gave his maid Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as her maid. Um, where does it say that Leah? Zilpah, yeah. Verse 24, this is out of chapter 29. Verse 24, Laban also gave his maid Zilpah to his daughter Leah as a maid. And then verse 29, Laban also gave his maid Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as her maid. So Bilhah
I'm
was,
gonna have to go kick my dad in the butt.
huh?
I'm gonna have to go kick my dad in the butt. He never gave me a maid.
Yeah. Even when you got married, huh?
Both times.
Yeah. Now, verse 21 ends saying, these are the names of the 12 sons of Jacob. The sons of Leah were Reuben, Jacob's oldest son, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. The sons of Rachel were Joseph and Benjamin. The sons of Bilhah, Rachel's servant, were Dan and Naphtali. The sons of Zilpah, Leah's servant, were Gad and Asher. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, the 12 sons of Jacob. So Jacob returned to his father Isaac in Mamre, which is near Kiriath Arba, now called Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac had both lived as foreigners. Isaac lived for 180 years. Now, where did I get the idea that he lived for 160? If he lived for 180, he outlived his dad by 5 years. So he lived on after, since his dad was 100 when Isaac was born. Then Isaac lived for 105 years after Abraham died. Let me look that up in these other versions and see what it says. No, the New American Standard Bible says 180 years. I don't know where I got the 160 from. The NIV says 180 years. Okay. So, saying that Isaac was about 120. Now, wait a minute. Okay, his sons were born when he was 160. So, if Jacob fled when he was pushing 80, Isaac would have been pushing 140. But he had 40 more years left. So then you've got 20 years after Jacob returns from Padan Aram for him to live and to have contact with his father for another 20 years. Isaac lived for 180 years. Then he breathed his last and died at a ripe old age, joining his ancestors in death. And his sons, Esau and Jacob, buried him. And so ends chapter 35. Chapter 36 will probably go relatively quickly because it's going to be a genealogy of Esau and his descendants. And we probably won't take a lot of time because there's no story really going on there. And then 37 and 38 are going to continue the troubled history of this dysfunctional family. So we have been going very close to an hour and a half, which is usually about what we shoot for. We've reached the end of a chapter, so I'd say this is a good place for us to stop. We have mentioned a couple of times the sermon presentation that we will stream, or we plan, I won't say we will, we plan to stream live tomorrow at 11 Central Time. Of course, once we stream it, it's available shortly thereafter.
Our equipment allows it.
Huh?
Providing our equipment allows it.
Yeah, our equipment and our ISP.
That's what I meant. Whatever.
We had
Whatever it is that's causing the problem.
we had an outage this week, and we're not sure what's going on. I've always wondered if the accident that hit a phone pole out in front of our house a few years back has not disturbed some things, and that we've got a loose connection somewhere that occasionally causes trouble. We've got cable internet in that our internet connection comes to us over a cable TV connection. We don't have cable TV. We just use that wire to get our internet connection. Usually it's pretty reliable, but it does occasionally punk out on us. And that is, in fact, why we pre record and upload this Friday night Bible study, because we've had too much trouble with our connection conking out on us in the middle of our study on Friday night.
You know, it would be nice to be able to stream live and for people to interact.
It would be nice, yes.
It would be nice, but I think I've got that turned off because way back when I first started this, people were putting on advertising.
Oh, yeah,
And I don't want advertising here.
yeah,
I am dead set against begging for money.
yeah.
I don't think that a person should have to spend money in order to have a relationship with God.
Yeah.
So I turned off the posting without permission.
Right.
But I think I turned off the chat too, and I have no idea how to turn that stuff back on.
Well, the point is, the live stream becomes available in the group shortly after we finish the live stream. So if you can't be there at 11 Central Time tomorrow, you can pick it up later and view it at your leisure. So until then, and until next week when we continue out of the book of Genesis, we say goodbye and God bless.
Bye, everyone.